This was reported by an eyewitness in 1989. They were trying to escape. They'd ask us, "Where's the railway?" We'd never seen a railway. They asked, "Where's Moscow? Leningrad?" They were asking the wrong people. We'd never heard of those places. We're Ostiaks. People were running away starving. They were given a handful of flour. They mixed it with water and drank it. And then they immediately got diarrhea. The things we saw. People were dying everywhere. They were killing each other. On the island, there was a guard named Kostya Venikov, a young fellow. He fell in love with a girl who had been sent there and was courting her. He protected her. One day, he had to be away for a while, and he told one of his comrades, take care of her. But with all the people there, the comrade couldn't do much really. People caught the girl, tied her to a poplar tree, cut off her breasts, her muscles, everything they could eat. Everything. They were hungry. They had to eat. When Kostya came back, she was still alive. He tried to save her, but she had lost too much blood. This occurrence was one of the many misfortunes during the Nazino Tragedy in 1933. It started as a proposal created by USSR officials to rehome people who were presumed to be rebels into forced settlements or agricultural prisons. However, approximately 7,000 prisoners soon found themselves abandoned on a remote Siberian island with scarce food, no tools or shelter, fighting for survival. Eventually, some resorted to cannibalism as a means to stay alive. During the beginning of Joseph Stalin's reign in the Soviet Union, USSR, now known as Russia, he would introduce a new political practice called collectivization. It would mean the peasants had to give up their farmland and work in state-controlled collective farms, where they had to meet imposed quotas. Stalin developed collectivization as a solution to the agricultural crisis, but in turn caused several famines as peasants revolted against the policy. Stalin deemed these peasants, and any wealthy peasants, as kulaks. De-kulakization began. People marked as kulaks were rounded up, shot, or sent to gulags. As a result of collectivization and dekulakization, gulags started to overflow and famine arose in the USSR and Ukraine. In February 1933, Genrikh Yagoda, head of the secret police, and Mativ Berman, head of the Gulag labor camp, proposed to Stalin a resettlement plan where up to 2 million people were forced into labor settlements in Siberia. The detainees had to populate the land and become self-sustaining collective farms within 2 years. The new collective farms would solve the famine, while the harsh Siberian weather would punish the prisoners. Due to past success and his confidence in the proposal, Yagoda ordered authorities to round up kulaks, criminals, and other undesirable people before Stalin had approved of the plan. The major cities affected by this act were Moscow and Leningrad. Workers in these cities were issued internal passports. Those who did not have or present the documentation were deemed unproductive, criminals, and unwanted. In some cases, people who did have their paperwork were still seized due to the authorities' lack of care. Authorities had to meet quotas, so some imprisoned people were commoners instead of criminals or kulaks. For instance, when a mother left her 12-year-old daughter at a train platform to buy bread, the police abducted her daughter to meet quotas. Another example is when a student was arrested off his aunt's doorstep in Moscow. The student explained to historians, "I didn't do anything. I was a student in Moscow. On the weekend, I went to visit my aunt who lives in Moscow. I got to her apartment and knocked on the door. But before she opened the door, they grabbed me right there. I was arrested because I didn't have my passport with me." Thousands were disappearing across USSR, while their families struggled to identify what was happening. Common people, kulaks, political criminals, petty criminals, and beggars were among the thousands deported to forced settlements. During deportation, some detainees died en route to Tomsk, Omsk, and Achinsk. By late spring 1933, tens of thousands were unloaded into Tomsk. Poor preparation did not help local police. The transit camp was scheduled to be completed a month later, and Tomsk authorities did not expect the convoy of detainees. A riot broke out 2 nights after their arrival due to the lack of drinking water. Mounted troops, however, put down the disturbance. Out of the 25,000 prisoners, 5,000 were marked to transit to Nazino Island, a swampy river island on the Obi River north of Tomsk. The region is bleak, only inhabited by a few native Ostyak people. The detainees disembarked below deck in 3 barges and were fed daily with only 200 grams, or about 6 pieces of bread, per person for 4 days. The journey from Tomsk to Nazino Island began May 14, 1933 and ended May 18th, with 27 people passing en route. Once they docked, the survivors realized the island lacked shelter, tools, or food for survival. Vera Penovaya, who lived close to the Nazino Island, retold, "There was no food. People were tortured by hunger. The guards threw them bits of bread as they passed the island. If you got a piece, you ate. The rest had nothing." Unfortunately, Stalin had rejected Yagoda and Berman's plan too late. The detainees had already docked the island. On the first night, it snowed. An additional 295 people passed away from the freezing Siberian temperature. The guards only rationed the detainees 4 kilograms of flour as food, and because there was no tools or ovens to cook the flour, people had to eat the flour raw. Most started suffocating on the powder. Some started mixing it with the contaminated river water to make it more digestible, but instead, it caused the spread of dysentery. From a report, immediately after the snow and frost came the rains and freezing winds, and people were still left without food. Every 4th or 5th day, some rye flour was brought to the island and distributed to the settlers, a few 100 grams each. After getting the ration, the people ran to the water and mixed it with the flour in their hats and ate it. Many people just ate the flour as it was, and since it was powder, many suffocated from breathing it in. There were already many disturbances from the new inhabitants about the lack of food. Because of this, the guards tried a new distribution method. They started handing out the flour on the opposite side of the island. Prisoners had to assemble into groups of 150 with a leader. The leader's duty was to collect the ration for their group members. However, since most leaders were criminals, they hoarded the rations to themselves. With no experience in agriculture or land cultivation, the situation started to make people desperate. Some people attempted to escape with primitive rafts. However, corpses would eventually wash onto shore because of the raft's poor construction. People on the island and those who successfully made it to land were hunted like animals by the guards and shot down. The people who eluded the guards were assumed dead due to the lack of transportation and extreme weather in the region. Desperate to survive, people formed gangs and resorted to criminal activities. The gangs terrorized weak settlers with violence. People were murdered over food and money, their corpses salvaged for any valuables. The guards would participate in these activities, trading with gangs, shooting deportees, and inciting disputes for their pleasure in the safety of their patrol boats. Gang members bargained amongst guards with sex, gold teeth, or other valuables found from the victims for more food or cigarettes. The protected doctors sent to the island for population monitoring started fearing for their lives. In only a week, 70 new deaths were counted, with 5 of these cases displaying signs of cannibalism. Reports of the incidents were sent back to Tomsk. The only response was on May 27, 1933, when 1,200 more deportees were transported to Nazino Island. Due to the environment, chaos, and diseases, bodies were stacking up. Subsequently, because there were more corpses than food, people turned to eating each other. Gangs would also murder people on the brink of death for consumption. They made skewers from the trees to roast the human meat over a fire. When asked if they ate human meat, one of the survivors stated, "No, that is not true. I only ate livers and hearts. It was very simple. Just like shashlik. We made skewers from willow branches, cut them into pieces, stuck them on the skewers, and roasted them over the campfire. I picked those who were not quite living, but not yet quite dead." It was obvious that they were about to go, that in a day or two, they'd give up. So it was easier for them that way, now, quickly, without suffering for another 2 to 3 days. Over the span of a month, guards arrested 50 people for cannibalism. In early June, after 13 weeks, the tragedy on Nazino Island would eventually come to an end. Out of the over 6,200 prisoners who were shipped to the island, only about 2,200 people survived. However, only 200 to 300 people were physically capable of working. 157 people who could not move were left on the island. Thousands who were on the island died from the elements, diseases, starvation, murders, or accidents. Most of the survivors were transported to other forced settlements. They would die of typhus or other diseases or refuse to work in the labor camps due to their past experience. One account from Fia Filobailina, an eyewitness of a survivor brought to her home by a guard, retold, "Once a woman from the island of death was brought to our house. She was being taken to another camp. The woman was taken into the back room to spend the night, and I saw that her calves had been cut off. I asked, and she said, 'They did that to me on the island of death. Cut them off and cook them.' All the meat on her calves was cut away. She was able to move on her own. She looked like an old woman, but really, she was just a little over 40. Rumors of the horror reached Vasily Velichka, a local communist instructor, in July 1933. He initiated his own investigation and wrote an 11-page report about the incident. Included in the report were retellings from local Ostiak people, detainees, and survivors. Velichka's report elaborated on the death tolls and living situation, also disclosed with the findings of 31 mass graves, with over more than 50 corpses in each grave. Velichka's report was later sent to Stalin and was distributed among the USSR's political members. The report sent a shockwave throughout the party. In turn, it was archived and kept as top secret. Those involved in the situation were punished. Velichka lost his job as an instructor. The guards from Nazino Island were reprimanded and presented with 1 to 3 years of prison sentences. The Nazino Tragedy and Velichka's report were kept quiet by the USSR until 1988. In 1988, the Glasnost reform occurred and the Soviet government gave the public access to documents that were deemed top secret. Of those documents was Velichka's report on the Nazino Tragedy. In 1993, an activist group began creating memorials with eyewitness accounts from the residents and survivors. To honor those lost during the tragedy, many wooden crosses stand throughout the island. Every June, many people travel to Nazino and the island to hold a ceremony honoring the victims. Let me know what your thoughts are about this tragedy in the comments below. I would appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to my channel. If you want to learn more about other stories, please check out my previous 2 videos. You can find all the sources I used in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this story, and I would like to thank you for watching.